In this video, I'm going to show you how to spool up some sandpaper, stick it on a metal rod, and call it a drum sander. But the devil is in the details, so stick around. Of course, yes, there are commercially available drum sanders and you are free to buy those. But I would like to dedicate this video to all of those naysayers in the previous video who told me that it lacks economy to take a scrap piece of copper, stuff a piece of cable into it, and call it an end brush. You guys should just go back to fidgeting with drum sanders and the overpriced replacement pads. The rest of us, we're going to be using homemade drum sanders that can be used all the way down to a nub.
Oh, well, good luck finding a DJ who can move and shake like this.
They're designed to be consumed. They're designed to get the job done. You can peel more out and cut away the used parts. Okay, let's be serious for a second. This isn't going to solve all your problems. It's not going to fix your marriage. In fact, my wife doesn't even let me keep these in the bedroom anymore. But it will do a couple things for you. Even though this won't replace your big, more expensive drum sanders that you would use on your drill press, what it will let you do is make smaller, customized ones, and it will keep you from wearing out those little disposables that I feel like I'm just constantly buying and replacing. It will also enable you to stop making these silly drum sanders that have a wood base. The more expensive ones have rubber in them, and there's a reason for that, because it flexes. These just end up burning. How well has this worked for me so far? It's been great, and I'm even using used sandpaper. I have been for the last couple years now. In this video, we're going to make brand new ones from scratch, and what I hope to give you is the definitive version. 5/16 rod is the sweet spot. I have tried 1/4 inch, I don't like it as much, and 3/8 is unnecessary. If you cut against a block like I do here, leave a little extra allowance for the cut. I recommend 4 inches, but 3.5 inches will work for most cases. Rinse, repeat for as many drum sanders as you'd like to have. And then it's time to clean these up, because we will be handling them a lot. One simple grinding rule. You can angle it along with the rotation of the grinder, never against. And similar physics apply to using the wire brush. As for the drill, if you get hurt using one of those, this is probably the wrong video for you. Now it's time to cut some slots into these. I have quite a few to do, but if you're only doing one, or if you think you have hacksaw skills, go ahead and freehand it. But I'm going to make a jig out of 2 pieces of scrap hardwood. With every hole, I'll increase the size of the bit. And the object of this game is to get the hole to be as close to being in the center as possible. And now we can stick the piece of rod in the vise so that it's clamped in a way to help us cut right down the center. Like I said, you can freehand it, but that's a tiny target. A mark is made at 1 3/8 of an inch from the end. And now the end cut is connected to that mark with a vertical cut. Don't try to cut all the way through at first. Think of it more like a triangle. Start with a straight end cut, then add in a straight vertical cut, and then use those 2 straight cuts to help finish the vertical cut all the way through on the other side. Let's keep it in perspective too. The cut doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to fit a piece of coarse grit sandpaper, which is the subject of our next step. That was the hard part, but it's over. And don't be discouraged because the rest is easy. It's just a matter of swapping out our sandpaper. A big belt sander belt is a great source for sandpaper. A belt like this is 4 feet long. That's a lot of sandpaper. And so once these are used, I give them a second life in my palm sander. And for the last several years, I've been cutting them into strips and using them in my drum sander. But these drum sanders work so well that I'm just going to use a new belt. A 5-pack of these 6-inch by 48 belts is only 15 bucks. That's $3 a piece. And this stuff is pretty durable. The seam is easy to find. We'll cut it there. Once it's cut, with respect to the length, they do give you 48 inches worth. But with respect to the width, they're not quite as generous. It's supposed to be 6 inches, but it isn't. Well, we want to make 4 drum sanders, and so I want to divide 6 into 4 even parts. Here's the easy way to do that. Only pay attention to the side of the ruler that's closest to us. Put it at 0 down here, and bend the rule until 6 lines up there. This automatically divides it into even parts for us. We simply measure 1.5, 3, 4.5, and all 4 of these parts will automatically be the same. Lengthwise, just under 1.5 inches. Side note, I'm also cutting a belt into 3 even parts. In this case, I just marked 2 and 4. The knife is parallel to the direction of the belt, and I put the tip of it on that little mark. Now I just lift up a little bit. Something dull, like a screwdriver. And now I tear. The thread is normal and expected. Just pull it all loose. And it gives you a nice fuzzy edge. Do not cut this with a knife. Do it the way I showed you. I'll tell you why later. If everything went well, the sandpaper should be just a little bit above the steel. Pay attention to the way that you're wrapping right now. You wouldn't want that flap end to get caught while you're sanding. So just try to imagine the way that your drill spins in forward. At this point, it's wrapped nice and hand tight, but not too tight. It still retains a little bit of give, just the way rubber would. Time to finish these up, but first, take a look at one of the earlier ones. This one liked to unspool a little bit on its own during use. Take a look at its top edge. Look how nice and crisp and clean it is. That's because it was knife cut, unlike this, which is furry because it was torn. This will give the glue a lot more purchase, and it should keep it from unraveling as much. If a factory edge isn't fuzzy enough, it's an option to sand it. Before you hot glue anything, to get the strongest possible bond, you should probably heat it up with a heat gun first. This will also lengthen our working time, so we're not in such a hurry. But another thing you can do to keep your glue gun moving is to make sure that your glue sticks aren't too smooth. If they don't have traction, sometimes the mechanism inside won't advance them fast enough. Okay, these are done and ready to test, and I know what you're thinking. Why can't we take one and stick one of these on it and make a bigger size? Let's try. First, let's get rid of this seam, both here and here, just to make sure that we don't make a bump. Got a nice variety now. These double thick ones turned out to have a 2 1/4 inch diameter, and I made one in both 1.5 inch and 2 inch lengths. And here's a long and a short one using only one strip each. These turn out to have a diameter of about 1 5/8 inches. These are good general all-around drum sanders. Don't go away yet. I still have some tips for you. I still want to test them out, and I want to try to anticipate some of the questions you're likely to ask. Question: does the bump matter? See for yourself. Watch for vibration as it spins, and listen for the tap, 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 tap. And so my answer, not so much. Question 2. Does the glue stain wood? For that, we have a piece of black walnut. I guess my answer is not so much. It hasn't been a problem. And when it does, it's pretty easy to remove. For the most part, it just seems as though the glue gums up, mixes with sawdust, and doesn't really bond well. And that was a pretty deliberate hard press. You're not likely to do that. Next question: how long do these last? And what do you do as they wear? To help answer that question, I'm using a piece of maple, which is the hardest naturally occurring wood found around here. Ooh, wow, okay, it got hot. And it started to give a little bit there. But the paper is still going strong. Wow, yeah, that's hot to the touch. You would not likely ever use a sander like that for that long. That is a lot of material. The heat made it so that I could pull some of that away pretty easily. So let's let the glue cool down on that one, and I'll show you with this one. That was deliberate abuse. You can even see that the factory hot glue melted. We'll get rid of that, but there's really no point in wasting any of this. There's still a lot of life left in it. And I could reattach this with the heat gun if I cared, but it will continue to function even if this does come loose. Under normal circumstances, this is what it will be like to peel some away though. And then you would just simply trim the hot melt glue away as you go. It is kind of tough to cut sandpaper this way, and you'll dull scissors. So an old pair of dull duckbills like these are kind of nice to keep around in the shop for trimming them up. Okay, I'll cut it, because if I don't, some of you will say that it's been ruined from pressing too hard. Still, there was nothing wrong with this. Having an assortment will be great, but there are some situations where a cylinder just won't work as well as a cone.
Oh, listen, one more thing. It'll just take a second.
Let's start with a big circle of sandpaper that we will then curl up into a cone. Next, we'll want to attach this sandpaper to something, and so we'll start with 2 hole saw cutouts, one from 1.5 inches and one from a 2-inch hole saw. These are aligned and glued together, and once dry, we can drill out the center hole to 5/16 of an inch. If the metal is scratched up, epoxy will bond to it nicely. The final part of this assembly is a little wooden circle. There's no hole in it. And we'll add a pinch of sand just so that the epoxy doesn't slip around as it cures. For this next step, it's all about where you keep your eye. Ignore this part altogether. The only things that you should be looking at are this right here and this right here. We're just going to connect these 2 points together, and it will naturally make our cone for us. The coping saw is just a little more delicate. Of course, you can use your trusty hacksaw. The only thing that matters is that you end up with a slot that sandpaper fits into. Once again, the direction of the wrap matters. You're not likely to get a circle to wrap perfectly around the top. If you cut the circles in half, you'll get 2 sanding pads, and they're a little bit easier to install. Same thing goes, start there, wrap around, and there it is. I give you the sanding cone. Not perfect, but perfectly handy. If you make one of these, you will use it. Hope this was useful to you. If you're applying this bend the rule trick to a project where accuracy matters, make sure you pay attention to the part of the mark that's closest to the rule. You want to make a mark that's parallel to the cuts that you're making. Don't ever make a mark that's perpendicular to the rule. That's misleading. This is the point that matters. Used belts also make great strip sanders, and they're strong all the way down to detail work. This one's only 1/4 of an inch wide. The drum sander's spindle can be used as a hole enlarger by sticking some sandpaper into the slot. It works much better on larger holes. The 5/16 is the worst possible scenario. I'd still rather have the correct drill bit, and this is not the best trick when you have a bunch of holes to do like this, because you'll wear out the paper after only 1 or 2 holes. But the plus side of this trick is that by adding more paper, you can find any width that you want. So for that occasional special hole, this is a pretty useful trick. Potential top comments for this video? Number 3, why not spool it up with a drill? Would be so much easier. Number 2, I've been doing this same thing for 35 years. And number 1, just buy one.
One of the things that I like about these homemade ones, as opposed to store-bought ones, is that it has a soft, rubbery cushion on the end. And store-bought ones have these metal parts that can scratch your woodwork. A point to remember before deciding to make one of these. When you're making homemade drum sanders like this, you're paying the labor up front so that you don't have to play around later, because these require a lot of tinkering. Whereas with this thing, you just cut off a short piece and then you're back in the game. It takes a long time to burn one of these out, and so you're deferring having to tinker for a very long time. Sometimes it's nice to sort of pay off your labor in advance on projects, because the tinkerer's game is a long-term game. Just like I cut pieces of sandpaper into quarters and set them aside for myself to use later, sometimes I'm investing my time right now into a project that I haven't even started working on yet. If you think of it that way, then the labor invested into this can be worth it. But you have to do your own determinations about economy.